I should rattle this off as well. I'm gonna make myself probably go back and watch this again. This one I liked when I first saw it. But keep in mind, some of our masters' agendas hadn't been fleshed out as well as they are these days. Just the same. In a second, there'll be another clip, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Because another one of these projects Flanagan knocked out, I made myself sit through it. More of the same. And in my opinion, it was nothing like this. But again, I gotta go back and watch this again to speak to it. So here's the long and the short of it. This jazz that was on the box, I think it was Netflix that Flanagan just shit this out on. It's a lesbian love story. It's not a horror story. It's bait and switch again, which means it's a fucking lie. You're being told something to get you in the door, to put butts in the, in butts in seats. And then all of a sudden, here it's fucking propaganda. What do I mean by that? And I know that hurts people's feelings. And I'll also say, yeah, it's okay for some folks to be gay because some folks are just fucking gay. But you don't need it in every single bit of storytelling you find out there. And you definitely don't have to use tactics like this to tell a story like this if it's not an agenda. And this is clearly a fucking agenda. I mean, just look around. Boxes are being checked. And usually that means storytelling isn't included. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should familiarize yourself with the Tavistock Institute and a little something known as eugenics. Because it's alive and well. It's oversaturating anything you can think of in terms of quote-unquote society. And this is one of many examples of people being broken down. This is normalization at its finest. This project, if it was honest in any way, would have been openly stated as, a lesbian love story, because that's what it is. It's not sneaky and awesome storytelling, especially when you see it coming a mile away. And the other thing that I recorded recently, Flanagan, he's lazy as fuck and his scripts aren't very good. There's a scene in this crap where the gardener, who, big surprise, she's gonna be the fucking love interest, she's introduced, and he lazily dresses it up as she shows up in a kitchen and she doesn't introduce herself to the gal, to the, I keep flipping them in my head, but the protagonist, essentially. Right away, you're like, okay, well, that's definitely going to be a love interest because what am I trying to say here? Sorry, I'm also boiling tea, pardon me, and eating some pretzels. They're calling attention to this character as if they're a fucking love interest, a future potential love interest. I mean, maybe there's going to be more than one, but definitely there's a target painted on her now based on the storytelling or the lack thereof. And so right there, that it's just divisive slop. The same gal, right? Part of the story includes her growing up with a little boy with glasses, and then they get married. And the way that's dressed up is essentially they don't outright say it, but it's almost like the male is badgering her entire life and telling her, will you marry me? Will you marry me? Will you marry me? So she just caved in and did it. But then when she's, in the moment, she's, oh, I can't do that. I'm going to be wishy-washy because I want to eat some pussy. But they don't say that outright either, but it's implied. Either way, what the fuck do I know? If you hung out, thanks for hanging out. Yeah. Then I got to go back and watch the Hill House jazz again because maybe there's shit in there that is just stinks. Just fucking stinks. Maybe there is, and I glossed over it. I thought I liked it. But so far, everything else that I've watched of Flanagan's it's full of agendas, which means it's not entertainment, it's fucking programming. He brings up a good point. Our masters do this often. In a number of ways, too. I mean, they're telling a story within a story. They're telling the audience something, but most people don't have eyes to see. Back to point, and I'll show you something in a second. This made me laugh. I do like the guy. Listen closely.
Bly Manor starts by introducing us to Danny. What is it with
Here we
calling
go.
female protagonists Danny these days? First Midsummer, then New Mutants, and now this shit. Anyway.
You'll also see our masters knock out things related to robots having to do with Ava, if you're paying attention. There are themes in the programming. It's lesser magic. You're not supposed to understand it. Now, how would you imagine they spell, or how do you think our masters spell Danny in this case? Anyone? I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could technically spell it, but if you look it up, and if I'm not mistaken, yeah? Take it with a grain of salt, but D-A-N-I. And that probably doesn't mean a fucking thing to people out there, right? To cast 1 is to cast 9, because if you multiply anything against 9, 9 will swallow it up and spit itself back out, which means you won't see things if you use the 9. You won't see things that reflect reality. The reason we cast 1, and this is something the ancients didn't leave in print, you cast 1 because anything multiplied against 1 is just going to spit back out whatever's multiplied against 1. Now, 2 through the 8, you'll see other things. You'll see things that reflect reality. So what we're technically working with is a 4 and a 5. Also appreciate, bear with me a moment, if you add up the numbers themselves, the numbers we're talking about, the numbers that define fucking reality, it is a 45. You cast the other 2, you'll see something else, but back to point. So, D-A-N-I. Why am I showing you this? If you think about what the ancients taught us, cast the 9, just for shits and giggles. Right? Dan. Now, most people don't have a clue probably what Dan relates to. It relates to the ether, among other things, in some circles. This is also why you have the tribe of Dan and things like that. There's, I can't remember the name of it. Let me see if I can figure it out. What's his name? Dennis Quaid. Here. Dennis Quaid mystery television show Ice. Will Google work? Fortitude, yeah. It's one of the later seasons of Fortitude. And if you watch it, there's a character named Dan. And there's a line in here that's lesser magic about how Dan is the life and blah, blah, blah of the entire community. And it's lesser magic at its fucking finest. Back to point, just in case you want to look that shut up. It's relevant. So you got this here, yeah? And we're talking about a gal. We're talking about gender bending using names is what we're talking about. Another one would be Michael Burnham, having to do with Star Trek, which isn't Star Trek anymore and all Star Trek space propaganda. But Michael Burnham, Spock's sister that nobody knew about because they just squeezed that shit into the writing, into the storyline to suit an agenda. If you watch, I forgot which shitty Star Trek that is, but if you watch that jazz, that has to do with Skynet, that has to do with that character personifying the moon. I shit you not. I shit you not. And bigger thoughts, but it's something else you could look up and something you could think in terms of if you want to think. And the reason I'm mentioning this is let's take this word. D-I-E. To die, right? D-I-E. You see something very similar again, especially if you cast the 9. Now let's take another one. And I mean, there's plenty of these out there that you could work with. But let's take man. M-A-N. I mean, you could tell me this is a spurious correlation, that words have no power, etc., etc., etc. But our masters do know this. You're not supposed to understand this. And if you were paying attention, if you were putting in the time, you would see these things for yourself. You would understand something on a deeper level in terms of the programming, which is lesser magic. Most superficial duds call predictive programming because that's what they were trained to repeat. And you plug in predictive programming and you find episodes of The Simpsons. And then you jerk each other off in the truth community. You don't hear anything thoughtful. You just jerk each other off. Either way, what the fuck do I know? Take what I say with a grain of salt. Blah, 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 blah. And yeah, thanks for fucking hanging out.